Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton. Welcome to my channel. Do you know, we all have free will. That is, we have the freedom of choice in our life, and no one would deny that. So we have a choice to travel straight on the path of the one true God, the God of the Torah, or we have the choice to, how shall we say, do it my way, do my own thing. I don't agree with that. I want to do it a different way, or I believe something different. Or there are some who think, I'll take a bit of this, I'll take a little bit of that. I believe in that and I agree with that. I'm happy with that, but I don't want this and I don't want that. So I'm just going to mix it together to fit my purpose, not the divine purpose, fit my purpose. I just want to demonstrate today in a very simple way what can go wrong and why we should stay on that straight path with Hashem. But I'm going to talk about fabric. And I'm going to say we should stay on the straight of grain. Now that's a tongue twister. Some of you will know something about fabric, etc. But just for the purpose of this, I want to demonstrate that when you have a piece of fabric, it comes with a selvage down either side of it. And it's not fraying, it's got little pin marks on it where you'll see it's been fixated to the loom. And what happens is, that is the straight of grain. Where your selvage is, you have what's called the straight of grain. And you'll notice there's not very much stretch, a little bit of give, not too much. But when you go across the width of the fabric, that's against the grain, it's called, you will notice there's considerable stretch. So as you would appreciate, if you're trying to put a piece of fabric that's cut on the straight of grain and stitch it up to a piece of fabric that's cut on the against the grain, across the grain, this is called the weft, then you will sometimes have a bit too much stretch in one direction, and you may end up with two pieces not meeting accurately at where they want to connect, and so you have a little gap, shall we say. Now, when you are putting together lots of multiple little tiny pieces of fabric, just as our life is made up, we're all like pieces of fabric in a patchwork quilt. And our desire is that when we're making this, that they all line up nicely. Our seams are all fairly even and accurate. And, you know, it's looking pretty good there. So we can say we're on the right path. But then you may get to a point with one of these pieces of fabric that you want to add to that. And there's one or two threads missing. Now, one or two threads in a big project probably would not make a lot of difference. You know, it's a slight deviation, it's a slight transgression. But if you were to shave off one or two threads, just one or two threads, and you can't really notice, can you? You don't seem to see a difference in the size or the shape of that piece of fabric. But you know, if you keep throwing away a piece of truth, casting off another thread and another thread, you're going to end up with nothing that resembles this original foundation piece. So my point is that we can all be a little inaccurate or discard a thread or overlook a thread here and there, but overall it comes together with a purpose. For instance, a piece of fabric that you want to sew into something. But if we keep not being accurate, not following the pattern that we're set in Torah, then we come to where we've made a block or a section in our life, and then something happens. Can you see that that's not accurate? me turn it over. You can see that this piece is shorter, narrower than this piece. And that's from the same result of me. I didn't cut the fabric precise. I probably lost 2 or 3 threads, and therefore the whole block, it could not be utilised in the quilt I was making, because it had too much of a glaring error, and it wouldn't look right, it wouldn't fit right, it wouldn't be appealing, it wouldn't be pleasing. Just as how our life needs to be accurate, we're each a piece of fabric. It comes together to make a block in God's giant patchwork quilt. And while 1 or 2 wonky blocks whoops, will be able to be accommodated and taken care of, if they're all wonky blocks, it's not going to match. We're going to get to the end of the quilt and you're going to have 1.5 inches that's not matching up. So that was a long-winded way of me getting around to explain my point. But what I wanted to illustrate was that just like fabric, our life is like, we can go on the warp, which is the straight of grain. That's where you have the selvage down either side, and that's called the lengthwise of the fabric, is called the warp. Or the straight of grain is what's commonly called, the straight of grain. Or we might deviate occasionally and go over here, we're on the weft, and that is where it's across the grain. It's on the stretch of the grain. It's against the grain. It's against the accuracy, against the truth. And we're all conscious that we've made those slight deviations in our life, some more than others, and some have repaired them, some have come straight back to using the straighter grain of the fabric always accurately. But so the important thing is, don't allow too much stress and stretch in the fabric of your life. It can only take so much before it stops meeting up with all your other values, all those other fundamental principles like the 7 Noahide laws. So we must, wherever possible, just as someone who would be making a garment, we will have a pattern, and we will have recommended fabrics and accuracies, measurements, how to gauge the size and the fit of the garment. And so the Torah is that for us. It's our pattern. It has our measurements. It has our accuracy. God gives us plenty of instructions how to sew our life together with Him, how we can be involved and in His presence, in His loving arms, in that wonderful, comforting patchwork quilt that Hashem has. So we must be very careful about how far we go. Now, there are people that say, well, I don't particularly like this, what it says there, I don't believe in this, where did this come from? They challenge everything, but don't want to concentrate and find out and get their answers from proper authority. They have a preconceived idea, or they'll replace part of what we're supposed to do with something else. Mix a bit here and mix a bit from there. And what you have in the end is something that does not resemble the universal laws, the Torah of God, and accuracy and truth. You have a mixed up hodgepodge of idolatry. Or you will have people who say, I'm a complete atheist. They don't need a pattern in life. They don't need any assistance from God. So my point is that while none of us tread a perfect life, we all deviate steps here and there. We've all gone off the straight of grain of the fabric from time to time, but it's been a slight deviation, we've been able to come back. You know, we can always come back and ask forgiveness. But if we continually stray away from that straight of the grain, that straight truth of God, then we become so far removed that it's either impossible for us to get back, or we just don't want to, because I'm doing it my way. I can make this pattern fit together for me. Nobody will notice. It'll work. It's like, and it starts with little things like you're taking the biro home from work. Oh, it's only a biro, you know. Or you're saying, well, it's only said in the Torah or the Bible, but I don't know how accurate that is, you know. I'm not going to do that. It's only a little thing. No one will notice. Well, I'm sorry to say, but it is noticed, because God sees and hears all that is happening in our life. And there eventually comes a time when you have to take account of what sort of a patchwork quilt your life has become. Is it full of inaccuracies, untruths? Has it been stretched? Has it been measured wrong? Is it going to meet with any approval from Hashem? Or have you managed your life quilt in a fairly reasonable manner? There's a few little mistakes here. There's a little bit of, you know, stretch and pull there. But overall, it's pleasing to Hashem. That's what we're looking for. That's what we want to create. So please, my friends, I felt that for me, it was easy to explain using fabric as an example to demonstrate. And I hope that I have got the message across. So please, it's much easier to sew when you're using all straight of grain. Sometimes you can't. In patchwork, sometimes you have to go against the grain and cut a piece of fabric. But if it's not continually happening in opposition to the straight of grain, then on those odd occasions you can make it match up quite accurately without it deviating. But if you do it all the time, that is when you get to the end of the corner of your block or your quilt and you're an inch and a half or something out, because of all those little threads that were allowed to fly off that tiny little block in as represented in your life. That one little thread here and there comes off. That's all right. It's only a biro. Nobody will notice. Oh, it's another biro. No one will notice. And eventually that block is not going to fit in your quilt of life. It'll be a glaring error. It starts off small, one thread at a time, and before you know where you are, you're all over the place, rarely on the straight of grain. So my advice is, please follow the God of the Torah. Be accurate, be precise. When you deviate and make an error, be regretful, ask for forgiveness, and always be comforted in the knowledge that God is with us every moment of our life. And He doesn't want us to stray. But if we do accidentally or unintentionally, or even if we do have that odd outburst of anger or disappointment, or could be anything, as long as we quickly return and acknowledge to Hashem that that was wrong, we should have had more faith in His divine providence. Those little things happen to us from time to time, but the danger is that those threads keep falling off and we never correct the path we're on. Going against the grain all the time will end in disaster. Thank you for watching this video and subscribing to my channel. Please take care and God bless.